You might have noticed the similarities between that song and MC Hammer's track off of Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em. I think that was the one. It was Help the Children. Yes, that's the first time I ever heard that, was Help the Children on that tape that I owned, the MC Hammer tape.
Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em, I believe.
Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em,
reference. Yeah.
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
yep. So this album comes in at number 19 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums, number 5 in the year 1971, and number 66 overall. And this is the grand poobah in Marvin Berry. Josh has Marvin Berry from Back to the Future on the screen right now. No, Marvin Gaye. But this is the best album on Rolling Stone's list, number 1 in the most recent issue of Rolling Stone. So yeah, we're going to talk about it. So Marvin Gaye, this album is his 11th studio album. Marvin Gaye is also known as the Prince of Motown and also known as the Prince of Soul. It was recorded on between June of 1970 and May of 1971, although most of the album was recorded over like probably a couple weeks, I think. And I'll go over that in just a second. It was released on May 21st, 1971. It's his first album that credits him as the producer. And it's also the first Motown album that actually credits the Funk Brothers, which were a bunch of studio musicians that were on a number of Motown albums, but never really got the official credit until this record. So not sure why that was, but
they're not the Dust Brothers. Also,
not the Dust Brothers. Correct. Thank you, Josh.
Or Dozier Holland and Dozier from early Motown. Yeah.
Right. We'll talk about them in a second as well. This
really?
is Marvin.
Okay.
Yep. Briefly. Yep. This is Marvin Gaye's first top 10 album. It peaked at number 6 on the Billboard charts and sold over 2 million copies over the course of 1 year. It became Motown's best-selling album until a couple of years later when Marvin Gaye released Let's Get It On. The album has 4 singles: What's Going On, Mercy, Mercy Me, Inner City Blues, and Save the Children. 6 months after its release, Sly and the Family Stone released their album There's a Riot Going On, and that album title came directly from this album title. So Marvin Gaye was asking what's going on, and Sly and the Family Stone told him what was going on.
I remember we mentioned that. Yeah,
I think we did. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All right, so a little history on Marvin Gaye. He was born Marvin Pence Gaye Jr. on April 2nd, 1939 in Washington, D.C. His father, Marvin Gaye Sr., was a church minister, and his mother, Alberta Gaye, was a domestic worker. He grew up in the projects in Fairfax, Virginia, as well as in Washington, D.C. He had 2 sisters and 1 brother, and as well as 2 half-brothers. Marvin Gaye started singing at the early age of 4 in his church choir, the Pentecostal church that they belonged to, known as the House of God. And he just loved to sing and was encouraged to pursue a professional musical career after performing in a musical at the age of 11. In junior high school, he joined the Glee Club, and in high school, he performed in doo-wop groups. He was so he's very prolific, very into music in high school, but he had a very troubled home life. His father was very physically and verbally abusive. That it happened for many, many years, and there were a couple of instances where the father even threw him out of the home. Marvin Gaye Jr. decides to drop out of high school when he was 17. He goes and joins the Air Force, but he really did not like the menial tasks that he was being asked to perform. So he fakes a mental illness, apparently, and eventually gets a general discharge from the military. And general discharge is one of the 3 ways of leaving the military. There's honorable, there's dishonorable when you really screw up, and then general is basically, yeah, we don't want you. like just go away. And so that's what Marvin Gaye got from the Air Force. So he returns home and he starts a quartet called the Marquis, and they perform around the area, including near Bo Diddley, who does see them play, and he gets them signed to a record company called OK Records, which was a subsidiary of Columbia. It didn't last too long. They were eventually dropped, but then they meet a man by the name of Harvey Fuqua, who is the singer and leader of the Moonglows. And so he hires the Marquis and changes their name to Harvey and the new Moonglows, and he moves to Chicago with them. And they record a number of songs. They back up Chuck Berry. So they're doing a bunch of stuff there. But eventually the group does disband, and Marvin Gaye moves to Detroit with Fuqua as a session musician. So that's the other thing about Marvin Gaye, is that he was a drummer, and so he spends a number of, kind of in these years, he's spending a lot of time as a session musician. But then he goes and he goes to a holiday party at Berry Gordy's house, Berry Gordy was the head of Motown, and he's just hanging out there, singing, and Berry Gordy likes what he hears, and he works with Fuqua to buy out part of his contract. And shortly thereafter, Marvin Gaye signs with Tamla Records, which was a subsidiary of Motown. So this is in late 1960. He initially records jazz standards and has little or no interest in R&B. He also changes the spelling of his last name because the actual spelling of his last name is Gay, but he added the E to the end of it to silence rumors about his sexuality and to also create some distance between him and his father. And then he goes and records his first album in 1961, but it doesn't sell well, so he goes back as a session drummer, backing up artists such as the Miracles, the Marvelettes, and blues artist Jimmy Reed. But over the course of the early and mid-'60s, he starts to gain some success as a solo artist. His first hit song was a song called Stubborn Kind of Fellow, and he saw further success with songs such as Hitchhike and Pride and Joy. And at this time at Motown, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but apparently they had this program at Motown, which was kind of like a finishing school. And this is where they would take their artists, their black artists, and they would educate them as to how to present themselves to be more appealing to white audiences. So while Marvin Gaye was more, I guess you could say, more appealing, didn't need as much work, he did have a habit of singing with his eyes closed, which made it look like he was asleep while he was singing. So he was meeting with some people at Motown to try to.
And did white people hate that? Like, is that what?
It was
like
off-putting. I don't know if they hated it, but it looked weird, I guess. And people like, why is he sleeping or whatever, detracted from the music or whatever.
Are they not hearing him sing? Like, he's obviously not sleeping.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't really read it a whole lot just about how offensive that was, but it was something that came up multiple times. It's like, he looks like he's sleeping, so we need to, teach him to, sing with his eyes open.
White people be crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I could say a lot of. I've been a white person for all my life, and I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say that singing with your eyes open is a characteristic of, it's just such an odd thing to say,
Right.
This is what we need to do for that audience. So.
Well, it's like 1962.
Or that like singing with your eyes closed is a trait of, non-white, artists.
Yeah.
Very odd. Anyway.
Yeah, right. You just sing like white people and open your eyes, right? Right. So he goes on to as part of the Chitlin circuit, he goes with the Motown Review, and he's performing. They did a ridiculous amount of performances. I think we've talked about that Chitlin circuit, but something like, 7 days a week, like 5 performances a day. It's just like a really grueling touring schedule that he's doing there. And this is where Holland Dozier and Holland comes up. He sings a song, gets another one of the popular songs with Mary Wells, which is How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You, which was a Holland Dozier Holland song. And so he's getting more and more popular. He teams up with Tammy Terrell, who I know that we've talked about before, and they become a really prominent duo. And one of their biggest songs, Ain't No Mountain High Enough, which you've probably heard before, comes out. And so they're doing very well. But unfortunately, during a live performance in October of 1967, Tammy Terrell collapsed in Marvin Gaye's arms during that performance and is rushed to the hospital, where it's discovered that she has a large brain tumor. So she never tours again. Gaye was devastated by this illness. He starts to become disillusioned with the record business. But he keeps going. He gets his number one hit, first number one single, and I Heard It Through the Grapevine, which was a re-release of a song that was originally recorded by another Motown artist. Do you guys know who originally did I Heard It Through the Grapevine?
Otis Redding?
Nope.
I can't remember.
Gladys Knight and the Pips.
Oh,
the original recording of that, and I did listen to that. It's I think it's a faster version of I Heard It Through the Grapevine. So, but I didn't recognize it. So this one, even though that was a number one hit, this one certainly was much bigger because this was a huge hit for Marvin Gaye. It's the one that most people hear, most people are aware of.
Yeah.
And also in 1969, he gets his first number one album with MPG. But he starts to feel like he's becoming Berry Gordy's puppet, felt his success was not deserved, and then Tammy Terrell actually died from cancer on March 16th, 1970, which sent Marvin Gaye into a deep depression. Oddly enough, at this time, he tried out he sought out a position playing football with the Detroit Lions, but they declined to take him up on that offer. So,
wow.
But some Detroit Lions came back and sang on this album. They sang backup with him. So,
what?
Yeah.
Lions? Which
Detroit
ones?
Lions.
Was he
I have to
trying to
look that
become
up.
Barry Sanders or something? Like,
Before
was
Barry
it-
Sanders, yes, he's like, yes, I want to be, yes. No, he wanted to play football. I think they were going to let him, but then something, I don't know, there was a weird reason why they did allow him to do it. But anyway, so in June of 1970, he records What's Going On, the title track from this record. This was actually written by one of the Four Tops, Obie Benson, who I believe was the bass singer of that group. He witnessed a act of police brutality at an anti-war rally in Berkeley, California, and he wrote this song. He shopped it to a couple of people. It didn't really work out, but then he gives it to Marvin Gaye, who records it. Berry Gordy refused to release it. He felt it was way too political. This isn't what Motown does. It's going to, it's going to lose that crossover audience, and I don't want you to release it. Marvin Gaye responds by basically giving an ultimatum: if you don't let me release this, I'm never recording anything for you again. So finally, Gordy relents, releases the song. It goes to #1 within a month of its release, and then that's when Berry Gordy goes, okay, I need an album to back this up. And that's where most of these songs were recorded within a relatively short period of time. So a couple of things before we get to the reactions. Marvin Gaye, in talking about the inspiration for this album, this was a good quote that I came up with. I didn't come up with, I came across. So he said, in 1969 or 1970, I began to reevaluate my whole concept of what I wanted my music to say. I was very much affected by letters my brother was sending me from Vietnam, as well as the social situation here at home. I realized that I had to put my own fantasies behind me if I wanted to write songs that would reach the souls of people. I wanted them to take a look at what was happening in the world. And a good quote about this album in general from Wikipedia. What's Going On is a concept album, and actually this is what's known as maybe the first concept album for an R&B artist or an R&B album. It's a concept album with most of its songs segueing into the next and has been categorized as a song cycle. The narrative established by the songs is told from the point of view of a Vietnam veteran returning to his home country to witness hatred, suffering, and injustice. Gaye's introspective lyrics explore themes of drug abuse, poverty, and the Vietnam War. He has also been credited with promoting awareness of ecological issues before the public outcry over them had become prominent. And the last thing I'll say is that the vocal styles, the layering that you could hear of his vocals in this album came about from the recording of What's Going On. It was actually an accident. Marvin Gaye recorded 2 separate lead vocals, and he wanted the engineers to play back both of them so that he could tell which one do I like better. And there was a little bit of an accident. They actually mixed both of the vocals into it, and he liked the effect of it and just decided, what, I want to do this throughout the rest of the album. I want to record 2 different vocals for a lot of the parts of the songs and put them together. So that's so you might hear that throughout this record. So there you go. The #1 album of all time, according to Rolling Stone. Very influential record. I think it's John's turn to start the reaction part of the podcast. So John, what's going on? What do you think?
God, I know this album extremely well. I have the same thought of this that I have every time I hear it. This is like a 60 out of 60 on my scale in terms of the songs and Marvin Gaye's voice. And the thing that drives me nuts about this is the production ruins some of these songs. I've always felt that way. And I know these songs, when you hear these songs sung by Marvin Gaye, the only song that isn't destroyed by not destroyed is too strong. The only song that isn't hindered by the production is the last song. So many of the other songs, though, the production is so heavy-handed, the strings, it clutters the songs. And when you hear Marvin Gaye sing the songs on this in a stripped-down version or live, these are incredible songs. And his voice is incredible, and the feeling he sings with. So if you could take the production out, this is a 60 out of 60 album for me. It's nearly perfect, the song stuff. Just the production of the album itself hinders these songs down a little bit, is how I always feel. And I wanted to ask you guys that, I'm going to give some of my space on my review right here. Did you guys feel that way too, or did it not hinder you as much?
No, it didn't hinder me. I didn't particularly find the production distracting or taking away from what Marvin Gaye was doing.
Gotcha.
Yeah, to me it sounded, I'm more with Josh, it sounds kind of like this is what was done in the 70s, like the orchestration and the stuff. It might be a little on the heavier side if you want to compare it to other acts, but it wasn't like the standout, oh my God, what is he doing? Or what are they doing? So, no, it's kind of standard 70s stuff for me for the most part.
Yeah, it just feels like it should have so much of an earthier production, like we heard with Bill Withers, right? And I just feel like if it had gotten the production that early 70s R&B albums that weren't on Motown got, and I don't even dislike early, Motown production, right? But it didn't fit with the seriousness of these songs. It felt like he was doing something that was a different vibe than, the slick polish of Motown. And it just never has jived with me, the production with how Marvin Gaye sounds and what he's doing here, and it's always bothered me about this album. With that being said, I mean, it absolutely, what Josh said, it doesn't take a lot to figure out that this is a collection of songs, right? A song book to some degree about his disillusionment. I think it was Josh and Matt had mentioned in that 1971 documentary, just being reminded how much Vietnam in the early 70s was just so omnipresent in the culture, and it infuses this album. Obviously, being a black man in America, infuses this album as well, and those things coming together, notion of country, who are you fighting for, that environmental piece is strong in this as well. And I think just with the heavy material and the soulfulness of Marvin Gaye's voice, it just stands out as just a remarkably well-sung album and a remarkably poignant album that holds up to this day thematically, which I think is why it ended up #1 on that Rolling Stone chart. That just the thing that hurts it for me is just that Motown production that just does not vibe with the material on this. And I can't stress enough, after listening to this, I always go and I listen to the songs performed by Marvin Gaye live, or versions of it that are stripped down, and it's like listening to it. It's like what Paul McCartney, I think, thinks "Let It Be" is supposed to sound like in his head, right? Stripped down, but like really, whatever he thinks that is, that's what this would be for him. So that's my only quibble with this album, is the production. I don't think does it any favors, but as a collection of songs, sonically, where things were going in the 70s, I mean, this points you. And it's really cool to put this in the context of the other albums like Al Green and Curtis Mayfield and Bill Withers that were doing, some of it with the consciousness rising R&B and soul, and just the different feel from what soul was like, in the 60s. And it's a different sound, and it's an evolution. And so many of these albums were released in 1971 and 72 that we've covered. It's a real neat slice of life to see how the music industry, and in particular male singer-songwriters of African-American descent, how they were seeing the world. I'd throw Sly Stone in there as well, in terms of what he was doing. So that's my take.
So something Matt said pinged in the back of my head, another bit of a combing the stacks trivia for you guys. What other album that we've talked about referenced a song cycle or was thought of as a song cycle? Do you know?
I'm sure quite a few. Quite a few of them, right? Yeah.
Van Morrison's Astral Weeks is an intentional song cycle. Okay. So I just wanted to bring that up because Matt said that and it pinged in my head. So I'm going to have a hot take on this album. I think this album is overrated. And I think his voice is fantastic, and there's no questioning that. And he's got silky smooth vocals, and he can sing like nobody else. But I think in terms of talking about social issues of what's going on, not pun not intended, and kind of the things that he's seeing in America, I think other artists that we have discovered and talked about, like Bill Withers primarily, Roberta Flack, and even something like Curtis Mayfield, I find all three of them more interesting than this album does. I think he sings the hell out of this album, but I think the content, lyrical content, seems kind of obvious and generic, and I think it is catered to white people. I think it's palatable to white people in a way that those other artists weren't, and I think it was maybe marketed that way as a result, and I think that's why this album is so maybe famous and popular, is because white people liked it. And that is not to say that he is not a good artist and is not worthy of that, but I think that it's not challenging enough for me. It seemed rather obvious. I think from song to song, it kind of sounded the same to me. The fact that there was no delay between the songs, I noticed that also. It wasn't obviously was clearly intentional. I thought maybe I had crossfade on Spotify or something, and it was just doing that on purpose. But
yeah,
or from my fault and not from the album. But gosh, what am I trying to say? Like, it's just him singing, right? And it's just and then you've got all of the production that John has talked about, and the with backing vocals and different instrumentation, and something was not there for me that was on those other albums that we talked about. I think there maybe wasn't enough variety. The fact that there's not really any kind of upbeat songs on this. It's more like he said, it's more of like him coming out of a deep depression. This album's like a lament in a way for everything bad that's happening in the world. And while I can respect that, I didn't respond to it musically, and I just don't think it's worthy of a number one album of all time on a Rolling Stone list like that as a result. Yeah, I guess those are kind of my initial thoughts on this.
So a couple things just to piggyback off of that. I think one of the things I didn't maybe mention or stress enough or stress as much on when I did the bio is that up until this point, I mean, Marvin Gaye was a very popular Motown artist. And he was also this big sex symbol. Like he was he's a really good looking guy. He got like his performances. He was a great performer, you know? And so if you want to kind of compare him to some of those other artists like an Al Green or like a Curtis Mayfield or Bill Withers, Marvin Gaye had this type of this cred, you know, this in the popular circuit that none of those other guys had, you know.
Yeah. He had a 10-year career, which Bill Withers hadn't even recorded, right? And Curtis Mayfield was, you know, so I won't want to say discount Smokey Robinson, but he was having the same career Smokey Robinson was having, but way less popular with the impressions.
Yeah, and he just had the sex appeal too, you know. So he was a very popular artist, and then he kind of does this 180 with this album, right? This very surprising. No, Motown they weren't political. They're doing like the Supremes and, you know, like the Miracles. It's all this I love you, you know, it's very, you know, very catchy, safe music. And I think that one of the reasons that this album stands out is because of that 180 that he does in terms of the theme and lyrically and stuff.
It's kind of like a step up for him artistically.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, yes.
But there's a process that when you're a known name, what the riskiness factor is of getting even 50% more risky than it is for someone who has no brand, right? And they can come in risky. It's a little like Sly Stone, right? You know, you have Stand and you've got this integrated version of stuff, and then, like, you know, 3 years later you're making like basically like a heroin depression album, you know what I mean? And there's a lot more on the line. That's, you know, he went all in, right? And there went all of the commercial appeal, right? Whereas, you know, Marvin Gaye, I feel like, you know, found a halfway point where he probably, I think why this album gets so much acclaim is he was able to take these themes, Josh, that might sound in the modern context more stocky, you know, but like he was able to sing to both white and black artists or audiences, I should say, in a way that the black audiences sort of knew he was bucking the system a little bit, you know, and white listeners might have been hearing about this for the first time, right?
And I would also say that, I mean, it wasn't just something that was hitting with white audiences or white artists. The black artists, the Motown artists, you know, the ones that knew Marvin Gaye, the ones that performed with him, you know, thought that this is a really important record, you know.
Oh, absolutely,
And this is, you know, so when you look at something like it being so highly regarded, particularly number one of all time, right? It's the thematic element of this. It's the lightning in the bottle kind of thing. It's the right person, the right time, the you know, the right concoction. And the themes in this are just as John was saying, is just as relevant today as they, you know, were back then. So when you look at it in all those terms of holistically, that's why this album is so important. Having said all that, I'm not a huge fan of this record. I think it's fine for the most part. You know, there's songs in here that that I think are very good. Like you guys have mentioned, his voice is great. There's 3 songs on here that I hate. Like I don't like them at all. And they're all kind of for the same reasons. When I hear Flying High in the Friendly Sky, Save the Children, and Holy Holy, those 3 songs are kind of, I don't even really know if they're songs. They're just, it's almost like he's praying, or he's just calling out.
They're very short.
Well, not really. I mean, Flying High's 349, Save the Children's 4, Holy Holy's 308, so it's not even the shorter songs on the album. It's just, they're not typical structured songs, right? And typically it's not like chorus, verse, chorus, bridge, anything like that. It's just kind of like there's music going on in the background. Marvin Gaye is kind of like singing in a great voice. He is singing. It's not like he's rapping or talking or anything like that. But it's kind of like it's not. I don't know. It's not a traditional song. It's kind of just out there. And it's kind of, and by the time towards the end of Save the Children, he's Save the Babies, and I'm like, oh my God, just stop this. It's just not even, it's not appealing to me at all. And so I really dislike those 3 songs. And for me, if there's gonna be 3 songs on an album of 9 songs, like a third of the album, I hate. The idea that this is the greatest album of all time, to me, is ridiculous because of that, right? Like, so it's. I just didn't like that. I did like Inner City Blues is a great song. I liked Right On a lot. I think that's got a great groove.
I like that song
that's
too.
The longer song. That's kind of the more upbeat song. Really like that. What's Going On's great. What's Happening, Brother sounds like What's Going On Part B. Like when the beginning of that song kicks in, I'm like, why are they still doing What's Going On? But that's also an intentional thing that they're doing. And for a lot of these songs, they do go right into the next one. If you're just listening to this without looking at the timestamps or how the songs are changing over, you don't know when the new song comes in, because it's just it is a literal continuation for a couple of these tracks. I like God Is Love and Mercy Mercy Me. But it's an uneven album, I would say. It's the best way for me to put it. There's songs on here that are pretty good, but I would even say within that, the strongest songs aren't on here. I'm not going or like, oh my God, this is this transcendent song. Like, it's good, right? But to the level of like, this best album of all time or whatever, like musically, I'm just not feeling it. I get the importance of the commentary, the lyricism, and all that stuff. And he's certainly a talented voice, but I kind of bucket like, all right, slow your roll here. Number 1 of all time, or 66 on best ever album seems a little bit more a better placed, ranking to me. I think that's a little bit more online with what I would agree with. But just really disappointed in those 3 songs. I just did not. I don't know. They did nothing for me, and I found them annoying, to be honest. But important album to know. I certainly wouldn't not recommend it. So I'd say go out and listen to it. But but as far as personally, it's not a it's kind of thumbs in the middle, I would say.
I think for it to be, I mean, you gave more context about how kind of revolutionary it was lyrically, and that's not enough for me to have it to be a number 1. It has to, the music has to be there also. It kind of has to be transcendent, and those artists I listed, along with like Sly and the Family Stone, are doing more interesting things musically for me. So I that's why I respond to them.
I think the other reason too that you throw this in there is because it did influence a lot of other artists to do different things later on, right? To go to they opened the floodgates for people to do more music like this, and it's something that's, so like I said, it's resonating today with a lot of people. So because of that, I agree with you, Josh, though. At the end of the day, like, I'm going to listen to music for the musical aspect of it. I can recognize cognitively the importance of the messages and all the stuff that's the history of it. But it's not an album I'm going to listen to a lot and be like, oh, I really want to listen to what's going on. It's just,
let me give a scorching hot take here, because actually the rest of Marvin Gaye's catalog, which we're going to cover stuff, doesn't revisit these themes as much as you would think it would. A lot more of them are about relationships, and I mean, what's going on is an album about sensuality, right? And then, no, not just, but like I always think of Hear My Dear.
You mean what you mean? Not What's Going On. You mean let's get it on.
Let's get it on.
That's the next album. Yeah, it goes from what's going on to let's get it on. Yeah. But he does. But you're right, good. John. It's not just about sex. There's other meanings behind.
Well, no, I mean, Here My Dear was about the breakup of his marriage, and if I remember correctly, it was like literally designed for alimony payments.
It was. It's a double. It was a double. It was like Sandinista. It was a double album designed that wasn't very good. That was just designed to help him pay alimony. You're right.
But it is good. That's the funny thing, because we're going to talk about it later. It's actually on the stuff like that.
Is it?
I think I'll give a hot take here. I think that there is a cottage industry in music in general, but especially, and I'm sorry, baby boomers, but I'm going to pick on them right here. And it's not just them. There's a whole thing with grunge music and, punk and, all the different movements, right, that capture a moment. But it's particularly strong in the late 60s and now the early 70s, where stuff is given this almost astronomical level of importance of just people then were just getting society so much better than other people were, right? And I think that's a little bit of what you guys are rejecting here. This idea of like, really, number one, this is saying stuff that I feel like people said stuff like this, but more profoundly. And the truth is that they probably did, but there still is a strong pull to this day of people that give that 1967-ish to 1972 period this prenatal, nothing ever spoke to popular consciousness. And there was a lot that did speak to popular consciousness, but I think it becomes heavy-handed at times, and to some degree other periods of music, right? Because for a lot of those folks, all the other movements were like always tied to that movement, whether it be, late 70s punk, whether it's 80s new wave, whether it's metal and AOR, prog rock, 90s grunge. It's all has to be cast in the context of that period of time. And I don't know if it does justice to some of this, folks, because what it does to me is, like we talked about with CSNY and Simon and Garfunkel, and maybe how you guys are hearing this one to some degree, it dates the music a little bit, and puts it in a certain period of time. And I don't know if that does it any favors, because it can then get looked at revisionally of not being the art that it was, because it becomes, it's of this time. And I think that might be a little, if this album had never been named number 1 on Rolling Stone's chart and it was number 67, and the blurb had been, Marvin Gaye decides to, throw off the shackles of Motown and write his first politically charged album, I wonder if you'd have the same visceral, reaction to this as you do with, Marvin Gaye encapsulates all of racial... And, what doesn't help it is that we're listening to albums that do the same thing that we also think sound better, right? And so, yeah. Well,
even before this new Rolling Stone list, when they first did the first 500 list, I think in 2003, this was still like 9 or 10. It's not like, because with the new issue, things got totally mixed up. It was a totally different reworking of it, but this has always been up there, and it basically just moved up 8 or 9 spots or whatever. So it's always kind of been there. And even if this were number 10 or 9, I would still kind of feel the same. Like, really?
Yeah.
So you're right, John. This is, again, sometimes my reactions are stronger. I had one last week with Stevie Wonder, right? Had it with, with the Rod Stewart, where there's certain times where you listen and you're like, you're putting this at what? This is like, look at all the other albums that you're putting behind this. And that's what makes me go, all right, whoa. It's, it's not all, it's not that great,
Well, it's why this project is so cool too, because we can listen to music from the 60s and the 70s and have context of what it actually sounded like in the 60s and the early 70s, and we can compare and contrast. Mm-hmm. What's going to be fascinating is when we get to, say, the late 80s and the 90s, when it's music we listen to. So we have that dual, grew up listening to, right?
Sure.
And we have that dual context of having to check how we feel about it with what we've heard before and what comes afterwards. And, we'll have to test ourselves to see if we have that lens. So in fairness, I'm asking people to do things that might be tough for us as well when we get to, we're divorced from listening to this real time. We only hear it in the context of retro. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all like in a vacuum, before. So it's a very different way of approaching it than it is when you actually lived through it. And I think that's, but still, that Rolling Stone list is not being voted on by solely people that grew up in the the 60s and I mean that's like it's modern people younger than us even that this is really speaking to. So I don't want to take obviously it's an important album for many people. I understand why, but for me it's just like I no way, no freaking way should this be that high.
I think something else that came about talking about this is I think Stevie Wonder is an interesting comparison to this because I think the same things were happening with him. I'll talk about this more next week, but I watched the Summer of Soul doc that's on Hulu now that just came out about the Harlem Music Festival in 1969. It's Questlove's documentary. It's really good. And they said so in the same way that you said that Marvin Gaye kind of made the jump artistically and had been around for 10 years at this point doing one type of music and then kind of, changing what he did. The same thing was happening with Stevie Wonder. During this festival, he performed at it. And I think with Talking Book, like we said in Cold Listen Hot Takes, that he made the jump artistically or was trying to do something different from what he had done before because and they say this in the documentary, he had been, he was like a child performer pretty much, and he had done this certain type of music, and people were wondering if he was at this point in his career where is he just gonna keep doing what he has been doing, or is he gonna like kind of make that leap artistically and do something different?
Sounds like Michael Jackson too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He repeated that loop, yeah.
So I think this is maybe what you were saying, Matt, like this is something different than what he had been doing, and I wonder if it's the same type of situation.
And there's something to be said for that. I think that's a lot of artists don't do that. A lot of artists stay in their lane, and so I certainly appreciate when somebody tries to do something different or they do something that's controversial, or something that's ahead of its time, which Bowie, all the stuff that Bowie did was ahead of his time, so whether it's musically or lyrically, that's certainly something to be commended and respected. But maybe you're right. There's a little, I don't know if it's a revisionist thing or if it's just like what it is, but to me, it doesn't, there's certain albums where I'm like, okay, it makes total sense that this is where it is, to me, I don't know. It's not quite there. Like I said, I think the Best Ever Albums has it better. I think this is one of the 66 or whatever. I think that sounds like a better placement of this, of a more fair placement of this. So that's,
and
I guess I don't know. Thumbs in the middle. Where would you say, Josh?
Probably thumbs in the middle.
John, is that
I'm a little? I'm a little higher than that because
because you said 60.
We're very underselling how good Marvin Gaye's voice is. His voice is A+ good, which I think I want to say that like Mercy Mercy Me and songs like that, What's Going On, there just aren't people that can sing like that. So I can't put it in the middle because I think definitely what certain people respond to is the silky smooth, meticulous, soulful sound of Marvin Gaye's voice. So I have to say that's where it goes up to me, because this isn't just like a person with a good voice singing stuff that you might feel. It's a person singing stuff that you might not feel that about, but like with A+ vocal ability. So A++ vocal ability.
Well,
so that's where it trends up for me a little bit. Yeah,
he's got that ability to do that really soft, quieter kind of soulful. So and then he can get the higher notes and get like more enthusiastic about it too. I agree with that. His voice is incredible.
So that's why I have to have thumbs kind of at what would we say? The middle is 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock.
You're
so
like
kind
45
of,
degrees?
at like 10:45. Yeah, that's where I'd put it there on the clock. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
One final thing of not really note, but I accidentally listened to this song on shuffle the first time, this album, in the car. And so listening to it again, it didn't really make that much of a difference what order the songs were in, as opposed to some albums where we see like they're more intentionally placed and stuff.
But they totally flow together if you listen to it right.
Right, exactly. That's a negative for me, right? If I can listen to the songs in any sort of order and still kind of get the gist of it, then I don't think it's not number one for me.
Fair enough.
Well, a couple other things here just to wrap, because this is the only time we're covering Marvin Gaye in the traditional show, right? Because I think we're going to do Cold Listen Hot Take.
We'll do a couple there, yeah.
Yeah. So Marvin Gaye actually, so in the years that followed, he starts to battle drug addiction, particularly cocaine, has some tax and financial problems. He goes out, kind of does the Rolling Stones things where he does he exiles himself to Belgium, and he's there for a couple years.
Did John he make an Exile in Belgium?
Exile in Belgium. I think that was a follow-up album for him. As John mentioned, he did divorce his wife Anna Gordy, who I didn't mention before was Berry Gordy's sister. That was his first wife. Yep, and she was an older woman, so he by several years, I believe. So yes, they get divorced, and in 1978, he does a double album called "Here, My Dear" to help pay alimony to Anna Gordy. He eventually leaves.
To be fair, you're married to an older woman too. So
I am, but I'm also not a rock star in the 70s who usually, people that did the Rod Stewart thing.
Older than you, not that she's old. I'm just saying.
No, you just call my wife old? God. And so he leaves Motown, and he ends up recording his best-selling single of all time, "Sexual Healing," in 1981. And
that's an 81 song?
81, yep.
Yes, wow, it is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And it's not a Soul Asylum song. It's actually a Marvin Gaye song.
I never would have thought that.
Yeah.
Soul Asylum did Sexual Healing?
That's what I said before. That was the first time I ever heard that. Was on the No Alternative compilation album from 1994. It's the first time I ever heard that song.
These musical tidbits of yours are so fascinating.
It's amazing, isn't it? That's what my friend said. Bizarro. My CD collection was the Bizarro Library of Congress. One day before Marvin Gaye's 45th birthday, April 1st, 1984, he intervened in a fight between his parents. His father grabbed a gun and shot him twice and killed him. And he would have turned 45 the next day. So tragic ending for Marvin Gaye. His father, I believe, they basically gave him like a ridiculously low sentence because of his mental illness and his health. He ended up dying like in a nursing home in the 90s. But yeah, he barely got any time for the murder of his son.
Was this is the story where they were at a hotel or something? Is that right?
No, it was at his house. It was at his house.
Maybe I'm thinking about somebody else.
Yeah, and something like the paramedics got there and they wouldn't let anybody in. Like the police wouldn't let the paramedics in because the father was still inside with a gun. So he's Gaye's in there bleeding out for like a half hour before anybody's allowed to go in. So who knows, right? Like maybe he could have been saved. But yeah, just very tragic ending. And he had a very sad life. Would you just find something out, Josh?
Yeah, I was thinking of Sam Cooke.
Cooke, I was going to say.
He died
bed of his lover.
Yeah.
Yep. So. But Marvin Gaye is considered one of the biggest, soul R&B acts of all time. This album was voted into the National Recording Registry, one of the things we've talked about before, and he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987.
Something I think even Gene Simmons can appreciate there. So,
yeah,
I think so. Yeah. Who's going to argue that though?
Yeah, probably
some
somebody.
haters.
Yeah,
they're dumb.